Good morning and welcome to Rising. Thanks for starting your week off with us, with myself, and with Lindsay. Nice to see you.
Good morning. I meant to tell you I saw all those invasive species all day.
The lanternflies.
Yes, and I can't.
They're really bad.
They were like in the doorway of my apartment building.
They're everywhere.
Yeah, I'm over
They were
it.
in my apartment.
And I don't want to drag everybody else through who's not experiencing this. It's not in D.C. that's watching us, but it's a big problem.
It is unpleasant.
Well, coming up on Rising, I'll be discussing the tragic incident where ICE officials shot and killed a Chicago man after he allegedly resisted arrest.
Plus, Pete Buttigieg is backing Kamala Harris by saying that former President Biden should have never run for re-election in the first place.
And Fox News host Brian Kilmeade is apologizing after a questionable comment that he made on the network. But first, of course, Robby, what's on your radar?
Well, let's get to it. Just days after the shocking murder of conservative media personality Charlie Kirk, we are learning new details about his alleged killer, 22-year-old Utah man Tyler Robinson. Now, while there's some still contradictory information concerning his motivations and thus every reason to be cautious and to wait for further confirmation, authorities are claiming that Robinson was indeed motivated by what appear to be left-leaning grievances. Specifically, he disliked Kirk for spreading hate, and additionally, Robinson's roommate, who's cooperating with the authorities, was his boyfriend. Now, that roommate is a transgender individual and is in the process of transitioning from male to female. This information was confirmed by Utah Governor Spencer Cox, who, in my opinion, has distinguished himself for his calm, collected, cool-headed approach to dealing with this horrific tragedy. Now, here's what Cox said about Robinson in an interview with ABC.
Yesterday that we can confirm that his roommate was indeed a boyfriend who is transitioning from male to female. That's information that the FBI had mentioned yesterday. We can confirm that as well, and that he is cooperating with authorities as well.
Again, I want to emphasize cautiousness because we definitely don't have all the facts yet. Let me say that as plainly as possible. Jumping to conclusions helps no one, because just because something is alleged by a friend or family member or a neighbor of the perpetrator, or even by the police, it doesn't mean it's necessarily true. For instance, The Guardian reported on Friday that a high school friend of Robinson's had confirmed his left-wing views. Then, unfortunately, The Guardian had to retract the quotes from that entire story after the friend contradicted himself. The easiest way not to end up looking like a fool is to take a deep breath and wait for more information. Haste helps no one. But all that throat clearing aside, a picture of the shooter is emerging. The transgender roommate/partner, the weird and edgy online memes inscribed into the shell casings of the gun, the bullet that was fired by the gun, the contention that Kirk was spreading hate, the postings of both Robinson and his roommate on social media, all these facts are beginning to suggest a very online leftist ideology. Now, while this does not mean that people who self-identify as being on the left are responsible, it does mean that attempts by progressives to paint the shooter as maybe or perhaps a MAGA person who is even more to the right than Charlie Kirk, well, those are not panning out very much. Now, one such progressive was Harvard professor Lawrence Tribe, who wrote on X, "Kirk's assassin appears to have been ultra-MAGA." He later took that post down. Wajahat Ali, a left-wing writer and columnist, wrote on X, "Tyler Robinson, Kirk's alleged shooter, is a white man from a Trump-supporting conservative family that loved guns. He used all the language and references that groypers use. MAGA will spin and turn and pivot and lie and distract. Their base will believe it, but they aren't the majority." And then he doubled down in an interview he gave for his Substack. Let's watch.
Has been identified, allegedly, the alleged shooter is Tyler Robinson, 22 years old, white, straight, male, Christian, with a conservative background, Second Amendment supporter, experienced firearms user, good son, outside of murder was law-abiding. His household, Republican household, MAGA household, Blue Lives Matter household, Second Amendment right household, taught to shoot since a young age, father and ex-sheriff, convinced Tyler to turn himself in.
Well, in case you don't know, the Groypers are an online far-right subculture that dislikes Charlie Kirk and other more mainstream conservatives for being insufficiently anti-Semitic. If Robinson was a Groyper, this would somewhat change the media narrative, of course, although, as I've pointed out, it's theoretically possible he could have been both far-right and far-left at different times, even at the same time. People don't have to have some neatly sorted-out political ideology, and extremists with mental health problems, they're even less consistent. However, there just isn't really much evidence at this point that he's a groyper. And the insistence coming from progressives that, yeah, he was MAGA, that looks like wishful thinking from people who don't want their own political tribes to bear responsibility for what happened. Now let's take our time, figure out what did happen, and then punish the person or persons who are to blame. But we are getting, Lindsay, a clearer picture of the shooter, and it does seem to be what we assumed from the beginning, that he disliked Charlie Kirk's harmful, in his view, hateful views, quite possibly about transgender people. That's the issue Charlie Kirk was addressing when the shot was fired, and he was in a relationship with a transgender person. They expressed left-wing views online. That roommate is cooperating fully with law enforcement, which is great. There's been no indication whatsoever that the roommate had any knowledge of, forewarning of, involvement of this horrific crime. And is cooperating, and that's great. The alleged shooter is not cooperating, has not confessed to law enforcement, so we will still have to spend some time gathering information, but that's where we are.
The finger pointing to me is the issue. I mean, when we talk about what the conversation largely has been, let's say even after the recent unfortunate shootings, has been a conversation on the Republican side of the aisle saying maybe transgender people should be considered as people who shouldn't have access to guns, right? Because they're assuming it's a mental health issue. So when you're conflating everything that we've been talking about recently and then naming that his partner was transgender, I still don't see how his partner being transgender connects the transgender person to the incident, right? The person that actually killed Charlie Kirk was a man who grew up in a Republican-leaning Utah with a Republican registered parents.
Well, right,
and
but he's not Republican.
No, but he's not Republican, but he also is an unaffiliated voter. And so he doesn't have any registration alignment on his last voting record that anybody can find, including the New York Times. And so trying to figure out who he more aligns with, to me, is a foolish task, when the task really should be how to get a criminal the maximum punishment that they deserve for killing someone. And I see the discourse online, but I don't see how this contributes to the conversation, because both of us have friends on both sides of the aisle, and both of them have seen these friends condemn this. And so when I look at online, we're bolstering the narrative of negativity and that people were actually saying that somebody on either side of the aisle should condone this. But what I understand in real life to be happening is that nobody wants to see somebody get executed in this way. And so that's why I don't understand why the top leaders that are supposed to be quelling the noise right now are trying to point fingers rather than coming up with realistic conversations
we'll
around
talk
this.
more about the reactions in the next segment, but I think the reason why it's important to assert, it's not like, oh, we may never know what his political views are. It's now becoming quite likely his views are left-leaning. Charlie Kirk is a well-known, famous right-wing person with conservative views, including on gender and social issues, and we now have reason to believe that's what would have motivated the shooter. And that's important, especially when left-wing people or progressive people like Wajahat Ali and others are saying, oh no, well, he said, he came from a Christian family, a white family, he's straight, he's not even straight.
The only pushback that I would say is, I was looking through all the times, because I wanted to make sure, because I know and can acknowledge that a lot of dialogue is used around President Trump and other Republican leaders by Democrats, the word fascist, the Gestapo, all these conversations that we're having. So I looked up how many times Republicans are doing it, and it's pretty equal. Like, we look at Ben Shapiro, he's called the Democrats fascist. We look at Marjorie Taylor Greene, she's tweeted fascist. I mean, don't quote me, go check. We look at President Trump on the campaign trail, he's called the Democrats fascist. So when I see fascist writing on a bullet, I don't attribute that bullet to any of those people I just named, or any Republican for that matter. I attribute it to the criminal. And so I think when we start trying to figure out who is most aligned with the views of a killer, we are completely missing the point on actually having dialogue that will help the country get to a better place than we are now, which is very divisive.
Good morning and welcome to Rising. Happy Tuesday. We've got another great show for you today. Lindsay, you're looking especially lovely.
I told Robbie I got extra dressed up, extra snazzy for him today.
I like the shoes.
Thank you. We already zoomed in past them, but as we go out to commercial, I'm sure you guys will continue to see my bright pink shoes. So coming up on Rising, President Trump's deportation efforts are hurting some farmers who actually voted for him.
Plus, the U.S. has struck yet another alleged cartel boat that the president says was carrying dangerous illegal drugs.
And Attorney General Pam Bondi is facing criticism over saying that hate speech should not be tolerated. But first, Robbie, what's on your radar?
Let's get to it. The shocking assassination of Charlie Kirk has caused understandable distress for so many Americans, including not just his fans and supporters, but millions of other people who are rightly dismayed by the prospects of political violence. It's partly because we just aren't accustomed to it. While it's commonplace for politicians and media figures to warn of violent political rhetoric leading to more actual violence, what remains the case that ideologically motivated killings of national figures are blessedly rare. Now, Kirk's grisly murder, which was captured on video and watched on social media by millions of people, is unusual and profoundly unsettling. Many people are processing their grief in ways that are edifying. Spontaneous vigils hosted by individuals whose lives were changed by him, kind remembrances of his approach to politics penned by his ideological foes, and so on. Others are not. In fact, many of Kirk's most ardent fans are now engaged in one of the largest mass cancellation efforts of all time. Some Republican legislators, MAGA activists, and conservative media figures are assembling watch lists with the explicit aim of silencing, firing, expelling, perhaps even criminalizing any and all anti-Kirk sentiment. Representative Clay Higgins wants to use explicit government pressure to crush anyone who, quote, ran their mouth and belittled the gravity of Kirk's death. Top Trump advisor Stephen Miller is vowing some kind of unspecified crackdown on the right's political enemies. Conservative influencers are writing down the names and professions of Kirk besmirchers and calling their employers. Vice President J.D. Vance, filling in as a guest host on Kirk's show, instructed viewers to engage in unrestricted canceling. Let's watch.
Civil society, Charlie understood this well, is not just something that flows from the government. It flows from each and every one of us. It flows from all of us. So when you see someone celebrating Charlie's murder, call them out. And hell, call their employer. We don't believe in political violence, but we do believe in civility.
Now, I don't totally disagree with Vance there. He's right that political violence and consequences are not the same thing. That's why when it comes to cancel culture, what Vance is proposing, it is always necessary to draw distinctions and register certain caveats. Criticism is not necessarily cancellation, and not every person currently under attack for having said something ugly about Kirk is a victim. The First Amendment is a bulwark against government action. It does not mean everyone can say whatever they want and suffer no consequences. If your boss fires you, you aren't being censored unless the government twisted your boss's arm. That said, it's worth keeping in mind that many commentators, ranging from classical liberals and free speech centrists on the left of center to many folks on the hard right, have embraced a larger view of free speech and cancel culture. It's better to live in a world where people don't get fired or expelled because they tweeted something stupid. And yes, it's true that there's a difference between canceling someone for welcoming the death of Kirk and canceling someone for tweeting something homophobic when they were 14 years old. There's also a big difference between canceling someone for justifying violence against Kirk and canceling someone who merely objected to his views, behavior, and political project. Furthermore, there's a major difference between canceling someone in a public-facing communications role and canceling someone who is otherwise obscure. So I want to consider two examples of post-Kirk cancellation attempts that aptly demonstrate why caution, discernment, and forgiveness are important in some cases, and in others, accountability, yes, is quite deserved. First off, Students for Trump activist Ryan Fournier attacked Shane Gillis, an anti-woke comedian who was himself canceled by the left and subsequently rehabilitated, for employing an audio technician who called Kirk a Nazi. Quote, "Is this who Shane Gillis has running his sound?" asked Fournier. Well, Gillis responded, "No, it isn't." On X, he shared a photo of his actual sound guy, who's an entirely different person. The tech person identified by Ryan Fournier was just a random person who helped with sound on one of Gillis's show at some point in the past. Gillis probably doesn't get to handpick the camera guy or the sound guy or the janitor or the plumber at every venue he's ever visited. I haven't. No one does. Being mad at Gillis about this is exceedingly lame, and people are rightly dragging Fournier on X. Just goes to show how lazy and careless attempts at cancellation can become. Again, this was something the right was well aware of during the heyday of wokeness, from 2014 to 2022. Targeting ordinary working people for unwise statements on social media should be viewed with skepticism. Then there's the case of Karen Attiah, a Washington Post columnist and global opinions editor who was fired by the paper for comments that she made about Kirk on Blue Sky. This strikes me as a case where the cancellation, if that's what we're calling it, was actually justified. To be clear, Attiah should not have lost her job for merely disagreeing with or criticizing Kirk, yet she contends that's exactly what happened. "I am the one being silenced for doing my job," she writes on her new Substack. The Blue Sky posts in question were trollish and unflattering. America, especially white America, is not going to do what it needs to get rid of guns in this country, end quote. Though Attiah is entitled to her opinion, what she's not entitled to do as a journalist and editor is manipulate someone else's quote. Attiah, by her own admission, wrote a post on Blue Sky in which she quoted Kirk saying the following, quote, "Black women do not have the brain processing power to be taken seriously. You have to go steal a white person's slot." That's an offensive thing to say. One problem, Kirk never said that. What he said was that the achievements of 4 specific black women, former First Lady Michelle Obama, former MSNBC host Joy Reid, Supreme Court Associate Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, and former Representative Sheila Jackson Lee, those achievements were suspect because of their support for affirmative action, that the existence of racial preferences casts a pall over their selections for various positions. You can criticize that point or disagree with how it was worded, but he did not say verbatim the words attributed to him by Attiah, which makes it sound like he disdains every person in that identity group. And she put it in quotes, which is journalistic malpractice. That's a fundamentally different situation. Opposing cancel culture does not mean there should be zero accountability for anyone in a public role. It only means that those of us who denounce the excesses of woke enforcement during the late 2010s should similarly reject a right-wing counter-reaction that seeks to unperson anyone who does not hold Kirk in sufficient esteem.
So we know that Jeff Bezos is in charge of the Washington Post, which has made a move, because you mentioned twisting the arm, like if the government is twisting the arm of a private company. Well, we know that Jeff Bezos is kind of repairing his relationship with the president in order to appease him, like most people are that own companies now, like CBS is doing. It seems like that from my purview. And so that's one thing, is that leadership is doesn't have any bandwidth for her correcting herself or being, they show no leniency whatsoever. Her quote was wrong in that it said black people, but he named 4 black women, specifically, like, let's say Ketanji Brown Jackson, for example. She graduated magna cum laude from Harvard in 1992. So there's nothing about her. And I wanted to make sure I read his quote seriously, because he said he said Ketanji specifically, if she's claiming that she used affirmative action, then the quote is, doesn't have the brain processing power to otherwise really be taken seriously. And then he went on to say, quote, steal a white person's slot to be taken seriously. So my question to anybody who thought that was an appropriate comment and not a condescending or demeaning comment is, why do you think that's automatically a white person's slot? That's the entire point for affirmative action, is because most people in positions that are hiring assume that they should look at the white people first, as opposed to just looking at the accomplishments of everyone. They should look at all people. But when you stay in your purview, you pick people that you mostly see, and most people grow up in like-minded communities, or most people have donated to Harvard, so then they let people that they know and nepotism happen. And so when black people aren't afforded the same opportunities, or people of any race, like Asian people,
the same opportunities.
Well, that's what affirmative action does, is bring people to the table. Yes, that's the whole point of affirmative action, to bring everyone equally to the table.
No, it's to
and
give
make
special
it equal
consideration
no, it's
to
not.
specific people on the basis of race.
He's misrepresenting affirmative action. So what she's doing as a reporter is saying, like, you want me to continuously praise somebody who said things, for example, on a different podcast, like if he walks into a plane and sees a black pilot, he wants to question whether or not that person can do their job. And I'm very much paraphrasing, but that's the overall point of his message. If they're picking pilots for some other reason than the most qualified pilots, then I would understand that. But so he should say that about the white pilots too. That could be somebody's Nepo hire.
Well,
you know what I mean? That could be somebody's friend.
Well, if they're doing that kind of hiring, I obviously.
Well, that actually historically is obviously happening based on systemic
universities do, which
that's
is
why we
based
got
on
affirmative action.
Affirmative action is not just making it available or doing publicity on behalf of roles. It's saying you get extra points toward consideration for the role if you fit an identity-based group, and that, I think, is wrong.
It's telling you that if people have been largely excluded in irrational and unexplainable numbers, then let's bring people to the table from these communities because they're equally as smart. And what we saw with Ketanji Brown Jackson is, yes, that's in fact true.
Well, let's consider Kamala Harris. Like Joe Biden said, because he was forced to say this, I'm going to pick a black woman for this role. So how do I know he picked the best person to be vice president if he already said he's doing it based on some identity group? He could have said there are many black women who would be great at this role.
Whether you agree or not, she's wholly qualified for the role. And if you're going to have that critique, what I'm saying is have it equal across the playing field. Like President Trump has hired people that never worked in government a day in their lives, that don't make any sense for the roles that they're in. Don't make me go down the list of people that are wholly unqualified. And so therefore, questioning the one black woman that's ever vice president ever in the history of our country seems odd to start with her.
Okay, but he didn't say that black women as a category are unfit or the way that quote makes it sound like. Which
But
is
it
why
pops
she's
in his
losing
head that
her
when he
job.
sees people of color that they're only there
my point.
because they're not equally as
No,
smart.
because they
but he doesn't
said,
have that
because
same
those
question for people that are
specific people said that. They said they got their position based on affirmative
because
action, that
laws
they
were
wouldn't
made
have gotten
to make sure
it
that
without.
they were even looked at to have an opportunity to be at the table. But once at the table, as you saw, they excelled, and so that's what I think that he's missing the entire point of affirmative action.
Okay, do you agree with me that no one should get special and additional consideration on the basis of race?
I do, but I do think
Well, then
people
we
should
don't
get an
have any
opportunity
problem.
to come to the table, and people should not be holding.
Then we don't have any disagreement, and I don't think you have any disagreement with Charlie Kirk.
I have plenty of disagreements with Charlie
Well,
Kirk,
not on
but I
this.
do want him to rest in peace.
Okay, as long as you don't get any extra consideration, then I have no problem with whatever you're defining affirmative action as. Good morning and welcome to Rising. We've got another great show for you today. It is Wednesday, and this feels like it's been a long week so far, and it's just getting started.
I know there's so much news,
Yeah,
and
so
heavy
much
news in
happening.
the last 2 weeks. It's been like
Very heavy, I know. A lot of heavy for many of our viewers, and we appreciate you sticking with us and getting through it.
So coming up on Rising, once again, the Trump administration is facing accusations of trying to whitewash American history.
Plus, Luigi Mangioni's terrorism charges have actually been tossed. Some of his supporters were cheering over it.
And as Israel begins their offensive into Gaza City, a UN commission is saying Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. So, Robby, let's start with what's on your radar first.
All right, Attorney General Pam Bondi has made quite the First Amendment-related faux pas in a recent interview about what the federal government could do to deter political violence in the wake of Charlie Kirk's assassination. She said the federal government would go after anyone engaged in hate speech. Bondi should know, however, that hate speech is vigorously protected by the First Amendment and, as such, cannot be policed. Now, unfortunately, the Attorney General made an illusory distinction between free speech and hate speech, implying that the latter was subject to government action. There's free speech and then there's hate speech, and there is no place, especially now, especially after what happened to Charlie, in our society. That's what she said. Take a look.
There's free speech and then there's hate speech. And there is no place, especially now, especially after what happened to Charlie, in our society.
Do you see more law enforcement going after these groups who are using hate speech and putting cuffs on people so we show them that some action is better than no action?
We will absolutely target you, go after you, if you are targeting anyone with hate speech.
Bondi sounds like Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, Kamala Harris's pick to be vice president, who made similar claims during the 2024 campaign. And that's a very bad thing because both of them are appallingly wrong. The Supreme Court has repeatedly affirmed that so-called hate speech falls under First Amendment protection. Most recently in the 2017 case Mattal versus Tam, which was decided unanimously after numerous commentators, including many fellow conservatives, called out Bondi. She tried to clarify her remarks. She said she was referring to, quote, hate speech that crosses the line into threats of violence. Okay, well, she's correct that true threats of violence against specific individuals or against institutions, those do lose First Amendment protection if they're specific enough, though general advocacy of violence is usually still protected. You can say it. This kind of speech isn't called hate speech, though. It's called incitement. Hate speech on its own, simply not a separate category of unprotected speech from the standpoint of the Supreme Court. Now, in a separate interview, Bondi also suggested that employers had an obligation to fire employees for engaging in hate speech or for actions such as refusing to print pro-Kirk posters at Office Depot. Let's watch.
Employers, you have an obligation to get rid of people. You need to look at people who are saying horrible things, and they shouldn't be working with you. Businesses cannot discriminate. If you want to go in and print posters with Charlie's pictures on them for a vigil, you have to let them do that. We can prosecute you for that. I have Harmeet Dillon right now in our civil rights unit looking at that immediately, that Office Depot had done that. We're looking at that.
Given the conservative legal advocates have worked tirelessly to defeat public accommodation laws that clash with private entities' moral, political, or religious beliefs, many on the right were not pleased to hear Bondi adopting this position. The Daily Wire's Matt Walsh called her opinion insane and said that President Trump should fire her. Senator Ted Cruz similarly clarified that the First Amendment absolutely protects hate speech, while noting that individuals could still suffer professional consequences for saying cruel things about Kirk. Ironically, Bondi could have avoided this mess had she listened more closely to one specific person, Charlie Kirk. As journalist Brad Palumbo pointed out, Kirk previously wrote on X, Hate speech does not exist legally in America. There's ugly speech, there's gross speech, there's evil speech, and all of it is protected by the First Amendment. Keep America free. Words to remember. And so, Lindsay, people are very upset on the right with Pam Bondi over this, and it is important because the whole public accommodation thing, this is the bake me a cake case, remember that? Yeah. Conservatives have fought for the right to say if you're a cake baker or a wedding photographer, you don't agree with same-sex marriage, you should not be required to perform that service in violation of your religious beliefs. And there's a cake baker, it's a Colorado case, I believe, got sued by a couple, and it's a whole Supreme Court case. The point being, conservatives have worked forever to defeat that rule that you must cater to a customer you don't agree with politically, religiously, ethically, morally. This would be doing the same thing. And her not recognizing that was a big, flashing warning sign for Matt Walsh and other conservatives I agree with. Given the Epstein thing, given this, I saw numerous people on the right expressing the idea, well, how many strikes does this lady get before we say, okay, you're not doing what we want?
That's the biggest thing. I think overall, and from the other side of the aisle looking at it, it's like, well, what is important to the party? Because if Pam Bondi is saying the exact thing that was railed against, and, President Trump for years has went at being at the top of the Republican Party, but I'll say most people in the party have gone on about censorship and how much this needs to stop. And so to say that you want to implement it on a level of calling it a crime and putting people possibly behind bars for the things that they've said, that to me is even a step further than the party ever even wanted to have a conversation about. We were just talking about canceling mostly during 2020 and past that of people who said things online that were negative, and just canceling them from their job, which private employers are, like you said, able to do whatever they want.
Yeah, they can do whatever they want. But we don't need to bring the government in.
Right, it doesn't need to be like a rule or a law. The biggest thing to me is that digital vigilantes, to me, don't need to exist online to the point that everyone needs to even lose their job. Past what Pam Bondi's saying, I think that we're going down a rabbit hole of the exact opposite, coming from the people of the party with the exact opposite thoughts. So Elon Musk in 2023 literally tweeted, if you're, quote, unfairly treated by your employer due to posting or liking something, we will fund your legal bill, no limit. Please let us know. And you remember around that time, it was around cancel culture, like the height of it, or the Republican Party starting to see their power grow and saying, we're not going to allow cancellations to happen. It's why X kind of does what it does. I don't like any of the negativity online surrounding the death of Charlie Kirk and people laughing or anything like that. But I do think employers have their own options. I don't think the government should be involved in trying to make people, specifically federal workers, because those are the first people that they can fire, right? Just because they don't like what they said. I think it could be a conversation. We can talk about a moral code. But if it comes to against the law, now we're rolling way past what's appropriate, because then we must comb through all the instances where other parties were offended, and there are several.
Right. It's not against the law, so we should dispense with any kind of legal ramifications for speech, for justification for violence, gross, ugly. Not a legal issue. Now, you can suffer professional workplace consequences. I think the line that Vice President J.D. Vance drew was a fine one, saying we should not try to cancel or go after people who just expressed disagreement with Kirk or didn't like Kirk. He called on people yesterday
to get fired
for advocacy or appreciation for or justification for violence. That's the line he drew. Now, I'm not someone who, I don't really like the whole kind of call your manager type deal. So am I going to be sitting around, looking for people who said kind of shady things to get fired? Absolutely not. I think conservatives have better ways to spend their time, probably. I'm not a fan of social media derived mobs, but if you justified violence in public, that was a pretty bad choice you made. Maybe just leave those thoughts to yourself. Like you said yesterday, if you don't have anything nice to say,
it's classic.
Don't say it.
101.
No, it's great advice.
I think it would behoove the Republican Party to have come up with a strategy together rather than the knee-jerk reaction that we're seeing of everybody getting on podcasts, responding, and because then you have what Pam Bondi is doing, who was speaking openly. And I know it's been the party of transparency, right, to try to get on those podcasts immediately and have dialogue.
I'm glad we got to hear what you had to say. I just don't like what you had to say.
Well, that's what I mean. The dialogue's all over the place. It's kind of like, okay, let's cancel everybody. Wait, we hate cancellation culture. What So it's just like, how about we first start with bringing the country together and saying this was wrong. Let's try to rectify this from ever happening again.